Billionaire was born deaf until the new maid pulled out something shocking. The mansion sits like a crown jewel on the hill, all marble columns and manicured gardens, silent as a tomb. Inside these walls lives Daniel Wilson, one of the most successful billionaires in the entire country. His business empire spans industries, real estate, technology, investments. And yet, almost nobody has ever heard him speak. Not because he's mysterious in some intriguing way, but because he was born completely deaf. From the moment he entered this world, silence was his reality. For nearly 40 years, Daniel has lived behind those iron gates, communicating only through handwritten notes and the steady presence of one man, James Taylor, his butler. James has been with Daniel since childhood, the only bridge between the billionaire and the outside world. Everyone in the household, from the groundskeepers to the kitchen staff, understands the unspoken rule. James is the voice of Daniel Wilson. James controls what information reaches him. James decides what matters. James is the gatekeeper to everything. The staff whispers about Daniel with a kind of reverent pity. Poor Mr. Wilson, they say. So brilliant, but so isolated. Thank God for James. What would he do without James? The butler nods modestly when he overhears these comments, accepting praise that feels like silk wrapped around a knife blade. He's woven himself so deeply into Daniel's life that questioning his role feels like questioning gravity itself. Daniel's office overlooks the entire estate, the tennis courts, the fountain, the gardens that cost more to maintain than most people earn in a lifetime. He sits at his mahogany desk reviewing contracts, making decisions that move millions of dollars with a single signature. To anyone watching, he appears to be a man in complete control, a genius, a recluse who has transcended the need for human connection through the purity of his intellect and wealth. But silence, even when you're born into it, can become a prison. This is where our story takes its first dramatic turn. But before we dive deeper into this incredible tale, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. Seriously, don't scroll past this. Like this video. And I want you to comment below and tell me what time it is where you are and what country you're watching from. Let's build our community together here at Storysphere. We're uploading stories every single day, and I promise you won't regret staying with us. Now let's get into this. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the household receives notice that they need a new maid. The previous one left under mysterious circumstances. James simply announced she wasn't suitable, and that was that. Nobody questions James' decisions. Within a week, a young woman named Rebecca Brown arrives at the gates with 2 suitcases and a resume that James finds perfectly acceptable. Rebecca is different from the start. She's in her late 20s with a warmth that radiates from her like heat from a candle. She moves through the mansion not with the nervous energy of most new staff, but with a quiet confidence. More importantly, she doesn't treat Daniel like he's made of glass. She doesn't exaggerate her movements or speak in that patronizing slow-motion way people do with those they think can't understand. Instead, when she brings him coffee in the morning, she talks to him normally, as if he can hear every word. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. I made the coffee stronger today because I noticed you drank both cups yesterday. I figure that means you like it bold," she says, setting the cup on his desk with a genuine smile. Daniel looks up from his papers, confused, but not unpleasantly so. He writes on his notepad, "How did you know I drank both cups?" Rebecca points to his expression, then writes back, "I pay attention." This exchange, simple as it seems, is the first crack in the fortress that surrounded Daniel for 4 decades. Over the following weeks, Rebecca becomes something the mansion hasn't seen in years, a genuine human presence. She sings softly while she cleans, not realizing that Daniel can feel the vibrations through the floor. She leaves little notes of encouragement on his desk, not because she's trying to communicate with him specifically, but because she's the kind of person who leaves little kindnesses everywhere, like breadcrumbs for the soul. She learns to sign, watching YouTube videos at night in her small room, teaching herself because she believes everyone deserves to be met halfway. James watches this with increasing tension. He sees Rebecca laughing with Daniel in the study, their hands moving in conversation. He notices how Daniel smiles more, how his shoulders seem lighter. And most alarmingly, he sees how Daniel is starting to rely less on him for information. When documents need to be explained, Daniel is writing directly to Rebecca instead of waiting for James to interpret everything through his own careful filter. One afternoon, a major business deal falls through. A partnership Daniel has been cultivating for 2 years crumbles due to circumstances beyond his control. The loss is substantial, not just in money, but in opportunity and reputation. Daniel receives the news through a formal letter that James delivers with his usual calm demeanor. But inside his office, with the doors closed, Daniel's frustration reaches a breaking point. He's pacing, his hands clenching and unclenching. He reaches for a priceless antique vase, Ming Dynasty, worth more than most people's homes. And in a moment of pure emotional release, he raises it above his head. His face contorts with the weight of decades of isolation, of being trapped behind an invisible wall, of having his entire world mediated through one person's interpretation. Rebecca, who has been cleaning the hallway, hears something through the door. Maybe a thud, maybe just a vibration. She opens the door, sees Daniel with the vase raised, his eyes wild with emotion. And without thinking, without planning, she shouts with her entire body and soul. "Stop. You're breaking the antique vase." It's a full sentence, clear English, loud and panicked, and utterly desperate. And Daniel freezes. Not because he sees her hands moving, not because he reads her lips, but because for the first time in 40 years, he hears her voice. His eyes go wide. The vase slips from his fingers and shatters on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the mansion like a gunshot. But Daniel doesn't look at the broken pieces. He stares at Rebecca, his entire body trembling. His mouth opens, but no sound comes out. His mind is spinning, trying to process something it hasn't been prepared for. He heard her. He actually heard her voice. The other staff members come running at the sound of the breaking vase. They find Daniel standing motionless, Rebecca looking shocked and confused, and James appearing from the shadows like a dark cloud. His expression is controlled, but his eyes? His eyes betray him. He knows. Somehow, James knows that something catastrophic has just happened. "Everyone back to work," James says coolly, already moving toward Daniel. "Just an accident." But Rebecca doesn't move. She watches Daniel's face, sees the way he's looking at her, and something inside her shifts. She knows something just changed. This wasn't a normal reaction. A deaf man shouldn't have stopped because of a sound, but he did. Daniel heard her, and the truth of it hangs in the air between them like humidity before a storm. That night, Rebecca makes her decision. She writes a note and slips it under Daniel's door. The note is simple. "We need to talk somewhere James can't hear us. Tomorrow morning, the garden shed at 6 o'clock. Daniel doesn't sleep. He reads that note 100 times, his heart pounding against his ribs. His entire understanding of his own existence has just been shattered like that vase. If he can hear, then everything he's believed about himself is a lie. Everything he's been told is suspect. Everything James has done, every decision made on his behalf, every piece of information filtered through that careful, controlled butler, all of it now feels contaminated with deception. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Daniel walks through the garden alone. It's the first time he's done this without James hovering nearby, and the freedom of it is terrifying. Rebecca is waiting in the shed, her face serious. She hands him a letter. It's handwritten, and as Daniel reads it, his world reconstructs itself in real time. The letter explains everything. Rebecca's grandmother was one of the surgeons involved in an experimental procedure when Daniel was 15 years old, an innovative surgery that partially restored hearing through a specialized internal device, something that looked like a dental filling, so subtle nobody would ever know it was there. The surgery worked, but it had limitations. It picked up certain frequencies, not all of them. It functioned best with a tiny internal amplifier that, with the right stimulation, could be activated. His parents had made the decision to keep it secret. They believed the hearing aid would destroy him. They thought that if Daniel could hear the world's criticisms, the expectations, the noise of fame and business pressure, it would crush him. So they chose silence as a protection. They chose to limit his world as a way of preserving his peace. But his parents had also left instructions with James. They left the spare device. And on her deathbed, Rebecca's grandmother, one of the surgeons, had made her own daughter promise to find Daniel someday and deliver the truth. When Rebecca saw the job posting, she knew. She applied. She came not as a maid, but as a messenger carrying a secret that had waited decades to be told. Daniel's hands shake as he finishes reading. Decades of silence. Chosen silence. A protective cage built from lies, no matter how well-intentioned. There's more, Rebecca says, and her voice carries a weight that tells him the story doesn't end with restored hearing. She explains about James, how in all these years he never gave Daniel the device. How he could have, but he didn't. How keeping Daniel deaf kept James essential. Every business decision, every contract, every piece of information Daniel received was filtered through James' hands. And slowly, over years, James had begun to steal. Not crudely, but systematically, skimming profits here, directing deals to associates there, taking commissions that Daniel never authorized. The butler had paid off the surgeons involved to keep their silence. He'd created a situation where Daniel was so utterly dependent on him that questioning his loyalty seemed not just rude, but impossible. James has been controlling you, Rebecca says quietly. Not because he's evil, maybe, but because power is intoxicating. You gave him that power by staying deaf, or rather, by believing you had to stay deaf. Daniel's face crumples. The realization that his closest confidant, the man he's trusted since childhood, has been systematically manipulating him for decades? It's almost too much to bear. But Rebecca isn't finished. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small metal object, no bigger than a grain of rice, attached to a tiny digital device. This is the spare hearing aid, the one your parents left with James. I got it from him yesterday, right before he realized who I really was. He tried to stop me, but he can't exactly explain to anyone why he was keeping it from you without admitting everything. She explains how she'd activated the device by tapping it against Daniel's tooth when she'd helped him up after he'd dropped his pen 2 days ago. How the panic in her voice that made him stop was partly genuine, but also partly intentional. A test. A confirmation. She needed to see his reaction because she couldn't just hand him this secret and have him dismiss it. She needed him to experience it first. I'm not just a maid, Rebecca says. I'm the last piece of your grandmother's legacy. She wanted you to know the truth, not to judge your parents, but to set you free. Daniel touches his ear, running his finger along the place where, hidden from view, a tiny device has been dormant for 25 years. He can feel it now that he knows where to look. It's been there all along. The truth about himself, waiting. That afternoon, everything explodes into the open. Daniel goes to James with Rebecca at his side. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't yell. Instead, he simply states facts. He's had an accountant quietly review the books. He's contacted the surgeons who are now elderly, but still living. He's gathered evidence of James' manipulations. And he's asking one simple question. Why? James, cornered, falls back on the only thing he has left, justification. He claims he was protecting Daniel. He claims the business world is too cruel, too loud, too demanding. He claims that his actions kept Daniel safe. He claims that what he took was insignificant compared to what he gave. Decades of loyalty, of service, of being the only voice Daniel had. But Daniel, for the first time in 40 years, doesn't accept this. He's hearing the world now. And more importantly, he's hearing the truth beneath James' words. The desperation, the entitlement, the way power once tasted becomes impossible to relinquish. You were never my protector, Daniel says, and Rebecca helps him speak the words aloud, teaching him how to form sounds he hasn't used in decades. You were my captor, and I gave you that role because I didn't know any better. But I know now. The consequences fall swiftly. James is fired. But more than that, he's exposed. The police become involved. The financial crimes are documented. The surgeons, finally able to tell their story without fear of his interference, testify about his threats and payoffs. James Taylor, the loyal butler, becomes just another cautionary tale about how proximity to power can corrupt even the smallest soul. But Daniel's journey is about more than justice against James. It's about rediscovering himself. With the hearing aid properly calibrated, Daniel experiences sound for the first time as a conscious adult choosing to hear. He attends meetings without James interpreting. He takes calls directly. He discovers his own voice, literally and metaphorically. The surgeons help him learn to speak more clearly, though his voice carries an accent born from decades of silence. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's his voice. Rebecca stays on at the mansion, but not as a maid. Daniel hires her as a consultant for his business, recognizing that her ability to read people, her intuition, her basic human decency, these are worth far more than cleaning skills. She becomes the first person he truly works with rather than just being worked for. 3 months after that Tuesday afternoon when the vase shattered, Daniel sits in his office listening to the sounds of the world for the first time in 40 years. Birds outside his window, the subtle hum of the air conditioning, the sound of Rebecca's footsteps as she walks down the hallway, rain against the glass, traffic in the distance. Music. He'd forgotten how beautiful music could be. He's contacted his parents' attorneys and established a scholarship program in their memory, not to absolve them of their choice to keep him deaf, but to acknowledge that they made it with love, even if love built a cage. He's used his newfound clarity to transform his business, removing layers of corruption, redirecting profits to employees who'd been underpaid for years, making decisions that actually reflect his values rather than James' greed. The board of his company is shocked. The man they thought was a recluse genius is actually a man of conscience. The silent billionaire is becoming a voice for ethics in business. The isolated man is building genuine relationships. And maybe that's the deepest truth here. Freedom isn't just about what you can hear. It's about knowing the complete truth about yourself. It's about recognizing when people you trust are keeping you in a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful that cage might appear from the outside. It's about having the courage to walk away from lies, even when those lies have been your whole world. Daniel Wilson spent 40 years thinking silence was his limitation. But the real limitation was never the silence. It was the deception. It was trusting his entire existence to one person's interpretation of reality. It was accepting that he couldn't be trusted with the truth about his own life. The people we trust the most, they have the power to set us free or keep us captive. The question isn't whether we're surrounded by those people. The question is whether we're brave enough to ask them the hard questions. Are you really protecting me, or are you really controlling me? Is this silence real, or is it just convenient for someone else? Rebecca helped Daniel find the answer. But the courage to ask the question? That had to come from Daniel himself. So here's what I want to know from you. If you were in Daniel's position, discovering that the person you trusted most had been manipulating you for decades, what would you do? Would you forgive James? Would you want justice? And more importantly, would you have the strength to walk away from everything familiar, everything you'd built your entire life around, to chase the truth? Drop your answer in the comments below. Tell me what you think. Tell me who you would have blamed. Tell me your story. And while you're down there, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Storysphere because we upload incredible stories every single day. Over 30 stories across different genres, and every single one is crafted to make you feel something real. We're building something special here together, and I need you to be part of it. Thank you for being part of the Storysphere family. I'll see you in the next story.